Now, that's how I'm going to clear the table. Don't you ever talk that way to me.
The new Hollywood film star who really cared about acting was Marlon Brando, even though he spoke English as if it were a foreign language he had acquired by sleep teaching from a gramophone record running at the wrong speed.
Who do you think you are, a pair of queens? Just remember what Huey Long said, that every man's a king, and I'm the king around here. And don't you forget it. My place is all cleared up now. You want me to clear yours?
His initial impact made all previous film stars, even the most realistic like Sinatra, look as if they had been just saying their lines. Brando conveyed what was behind the lines. He conveyed emotion, whole complexes of emotions, bottomless wells of psychic disturbance. Brando was the brooding outcast with the beautiful face.
Stella!
Hey, Stella! You quit that howling down there and go to bed.
Sure, sir. Why am I clothes down here?
You shut up. You're going to get the law.
Hey,
you
Stella!
woman, and then call her back, because she ain't going to come. You're going to have a...
He was a social explosion, a brilliantly timed belch. Only the movies could handle it. Television wouldn't have stood for it. People would have kept adjusting the set.
Hey, Stella!
Brando managed to behave at his first Oscar ceremony, but he didn't like Hollywood hype. For the moment, he was prepared to jump through hoops, but he hated himself for pretending to be pleased. If he had to show up at the premiere to push a movie, he might smile at the time, but he felt manipulated afterwards.
Luck to be a lady tonight. Luck to be a lady tonight. Luck if you've ever been a lady to begin with. Luck be a lady tonight.
His frustration was compounded by his lack of control over the movies he made. He could turn them down, but he couldn't set them up. No actor was that powerful. He had to play those big, straight, starring roles. He proved that he could play them better than a brooding outcast might be expected to do. But a brooding outcast he always remained. Whatever he was up to on screen, the real drama was Brando versus Hollywood, Brando versus America, Brando versus the world.
Stick with me, baby, I'm the fella you came in with. Luck be a lady. Luck be a lady. Luck be a lady tonight.
Welcome to episode 11 of Film Gold. Now, this is a little bit of a departure today. Rather than featuring a single film, we're going to be featuring a single actor, quite a special one. If you've read the title, you'll know who we're going to be talking about. And I'm joined again today, well, for the first time on Film Gold, but not the first time on my other various podcasts, David Wills, a.k.a. Ghosty. How are you doing, mate?
I'm doing good. I'm happy to be on this side of your creative spectrum. Nice. Having appeared on your Glass Onion show. Now, do you talk about that program on this program, or is that verboten, that these worlds never mingle?
No, I talk about the other ones as much as possible.
Oh, okay.
But you can do it for me if you want. Tell the listeners about my other
heard. Glass Onion on John Lennon uses John Lennon as a pivot point to talk about many, many other things in the world of art, literature, politics,
psychology, drugs.
Yes.
My other one is Life and Life Only that you haven't been on yet, but pretty sure you will be in the future.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. Life and Life Only is Anthony's podcast, and this deals with pretty much the exact same topics that are discussed on Glass Onion from a much more personal perspective rather than using John Lennon.
Yeah. It's about life. So nice wide.
Right.
Now, it's a search for inner and outer truth. So the inner is more like self-development, and the outer is how to negotiate the media and things like that, and how to try and work out what's true, if that's even possible. Anyway, it's nice to have you back.
Thank you. And it kind of plays into the person we're talking about today was concerned with these same things.
Oh, very much so, yes. So, because this is your first time on this podcast, I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to do the dreaded intro. Perhaps you could do it backwards or do it in a foreign language. I don't know. Otherwise, if you could just introduce yourself.
Well, you're sitting in my car in northern New Jersey, and David Ghosty Wills is a person who is a radio disc jockey. That and 50 cents will get you a cup of coffee. And also a voice actor who's appeared in many, many cartoon programs that he himself has never seen. And occasionally I am asked to appear on cartoon voice acting podcasts, talk about these shows that I never actually watched. And it can be a little embarrassing. That's what I'm primarily known for, is the cartoon voice work.
Right. You did Celebrity Deathmatch. I can't believe it.
I did. In fact, that's the high point of my voiceover career. It was actually the first job I had. So it was all downhill after that. And I did that for a number of years. Never played Brando, though. I don't even know if they used him in that. Because like the Elvis show that we did, I do have a feeling it's going to be tough not to get into a Brando imitation at some point. I don't know if you can resist.
I mean, I have the Godfather one, but I think it's been done so many times.
Right.
I never feel like anyone actually captures him. I did have a look at that Chris Elliott stuff. We could talk about that later, maybe. But yeah. That's
really not much of an impression that he's doing there. But I was watching the Meet Marlon Brando documentary, that 25-minute. Was it the Maisels brothers who did that?
Maisel brothers, yeah. We'll definitely talk about that in a minute, actually. Yeah.
I was watching it and practicing because it's like,
it's so strange what's happening with this interview.
But I can't really do it. But it's sort of like in that wheelhouse.
No, that was good because you didn't go down the, you don't even think to call me Godfather.
Oh, yeah.
Didn't even go down.
No, I never do that.
Which is good.
I can't imagine a script as bad as Desiree and that I did it.
Those sorts of things.
That's a good one, yeah. All right. So, what I was going to say to the audience that, you were on my John Lennon show. We did this 3-part about Elvis. Got very good reception. We were very happy with it. And I don't know at what point Marlon Brando came up in our conversation. I can't even remember. And I was amazed to find that not only, had we done this great show and we had a good podcast rapport going, that you felt as strongly about Marlon Brando as I did. Probably good and bad. We're not holding him as a paragon of virtue. Although I think he had some very good qualities. But do you remember at what point we were talking about him? I can't remember when it came up.
Well, I think we were talking about these very compelling and charismatic figures. And we had mentioned Lennon, obviously, because that was the show. And you had mentioned Brando, and then we also got into Orson Welles. Oh, and I think both of us were stunned saying, well, those are like our 3 top guys, So I don't know how we got into Brando other than maybe discussing the time period of the mid-50s when we were discussing Elvis. But it just seemed a natural that we would eventually get around to discussing him. And Fantastic. Here we are.
Yeah. All right. We've got so much to get into. What I thought we could do to start, we both prepared a list of top 10 Marlon Brando. I'm going to say either films or performances. I've tended to disregard the bit parts, so I haven't included Superman. I haven't included the score, which I saw last night and I thought was really, really good, but it's much more of a De Niro and Edward Norton film. And there's one bit part that I have included, a certain Vietnam film that was just too good not to be in my top 10. But before we get into the top 10, we also said we prepare a few honourable mentions. So can you give us a few of those, sort of bubbling under the top 10, let's say?
Bubbling under the top 10 for me? Yeah. Oh, it's really going to spoil it for people. They might even turn this off when they hear this. So bubbling under would be The Godfather.
Wow.
The other one bubbling under on my list would be Apocalypse Now. Okay. Now, I love both of these films, but these are not movies that when I was in full-on Brando mode. Shall I tell you how I became a Brando-phile?
Oh, yes, we do. Let's do briefly origin stories. Yeah, why not? Go for it.
So when I was heavily getting into movies and obscure movies and strange and offbeat films, there was a video store in Piermont, New York called Piermont Pictures. And I just want to give them a plug because it was this tiny little shack nestled near the Hudson River that had every movie you could think of. It was phenomenal. It was a film lover's dream. There are a lot of very famous people that live in that area who would often go there and to rent movies, and their pictures would be up on the wall. And so at that same time, I was in my 20s, and I'm at that point where I'm going out and I'm carousing. And I was looking for, not consciously, but I was looking for masculine role models as I was sort of getting out there, and, you know, there were women involved, a lot of partying and things like that. And somewhere in there, I was very, very fascinated with Jim Morrison. Somewhere in there, there was Brando. And even some sports stars became sort of iconic for me at that time. But anyway, it made sense to try to watch as many Brando films as I could. And this place happened to have them all. You know, everything that Brando had ever been in, they had. So I was able to see, not all of them, though. There were a few that I missed. I never saw Tea House of the August Moon. But I did see as many as I could, and some of them very, you know, rare films that always stuck with me and that I just always have a special feeling about. And a lot of these movies, I'd say half my list, are offbeat films that maybe people don't think very highly of, but for some reason they came along, or I came along at that perfect time to really get into these films. And also at that same time, I was getting into acting myself and getting into voiceover work. And so I was paying attention to what Brando was doing. There's a lot that Brando's doing visually that I'm not able to do doing voiceover work. But there was just a whole stew of things happening at that time.
Wow.
So that's my story.
Yeah, for me, really it's a certain seafaring film from 1962 that's in my top 10. I'll get to that in a sec. And then the Connie Chung interview, which again, we're going to talk about interviews. We've got so much to get through. So if you don't mind, we'll move fairly swiftly. Otherwise, I think we'll be here for the rest of our lives. But yeah, the Connie Chung interview from 1989. And it was amazing having seen a couple of his early films. I didn't know much about him. I was only like 13, 14. To suddenly see this guy who was, I mean, he was big, of course. We know he became obese in his later years, but he was also quite scary as well. And there's a bit in the interview. In fact, I watched it last night and I didn't find him scary. It was a bit scary, a bit cartoony, but you could kind of see that there was still some warmth there. But at the time, you know, you get so used to just boring interviews. Oh, when's your next film coming out? Oh, what do you think about this? Oh, yeah, it's great. To see a guy like, there's a bit where Connie Chung says, why don't you make a film about, you know, Native Americans? He says, you are making me really angry. And like I said, when I watched it last night, it didn't seem like that scary, but just seeing this guy, and there's a couple of things he said in that interview, this thing that he always said about we're all actors, you know. Right. And when you grow up, I don't know about you, but maybe when you got into acting, you learned this, but no one had ever told me, you know, that people don't behave naturally. We behave as naturally as possible, but, you know, you go out in the street and you start acting and you don't even realize. Exactly. You know, there's other stuff he said about, there's a bit where she says, oh, you're this or you're that. She said, oh, I read about it. He said, you shouldn't ever believe what you read. You shouldn't ever believe what you hear. And what he meant was not that it's all bullshit, that you shouldn't take things at face value. So there were just 2 or 3 things he said in that interview, and his whole demeanor of not playing the game that just had a profound effect on me. And then I kind of went back, and because of the seafaring film where he's got an upper class English accent, I mean, I thought that accent was fake, but I didn't actually know he was American until a certain point. And then, you know, my dad probably showed me The Godfather and everything. So let's go back to our list. Have you got any more honorable mentions? Or?
Yeah, you just mentioned One Mutiny on the Bounty.
Okay,
our lists are going to be so divergent. You mentioned that Connie Chung interview, and the Larry King interview was only a few years later, right?
Yeah, quite a difference.
That's a great one, too, only because I just love these. I mean, Larry was out to lunch permanently. Larry's questions, they were so strange. They're just very strange questions. And Brando, at some point, interrupts him and is like, look at this dog here.
Yeah.
This is my favorite dog. He's a big guy. Come over here.
Yeah.
And he's consciously doing this. He's doing everything he can to sort of disrupt this interview and turn it into some kind of event. Like the whole thing to him is so phony. Yeah. So, yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that Larry King interview. I do feel like these are more cartoonish, over-the-top versions of things that were more charming years ago,
Yeah, maybe. I've never had a great deal of respect for Larry King. I mean, maybe, as an entertainment interviewer, but when he was dealing with politics, when he died, I nearly posted a cheeky comment on social media, something along the lines of politicians all around the world are mourning the tragic loss of Larry King's softball questioning. But yeah, all that has been brilliantly spoofed a couple of times, actually. SNL with Travolta as Brando, but someone actually spoofed Larry King, and it was something along the lines of, like, Marlon, I got some really tough questions for you today. How'd you get here? So,
that's typical Larry King question is like, tell me, did you love your mother?
Yeah.
And you're like, who would ask a question like that? But the thing is, it's done genuinely. It's not like he was handed a list of softball questions. I think he's genuinely a very kind of woolly-headed guy.
Yeah.
But anyway, we
we
can get back into the list.
Okay. My honourable mention, I've got a lot because I've watched over the last 2 weeks, I think 6 Brando films. And he's been fantastic. It's almost spanning his entire career because his career is actually 61 years. I know he took a bit of time out and he kind of phoned it in his last few years, but even so. And so I've got Viva Zapata, which I watched for the first time. Really liked it. I have to be honest, I wasn't impressed by the Wild One, but I loved his look. I thought he just looked like the coolest guy ever.
Right.
And I still think that. And then the Young Lions I really liked. And then...
these are your honorable mentions.
These are my honorable mentions.
Okay.
We haven't even got to the top 10. We've already done an hour. No, we haven't. No. And then The Freshman, which is obviously a spoof of The Godfather. And I think Matthew Broderick genuinely had a great experience working with Marlon there.
He did
with the director, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. Brando did, talk to the media and say, this is the worst film I ever made. It's such an embarrassment to be in this movie. And then he had to apologize. I think he said something like, I had a fish lunch and it didn't sit well with me. I was in a bad mood or whatever. Yeah.
All right. Okay. The way we're going to do this. So you do your 10 and 9. I do my 10 and 9. I do my 8 and 7. You do your 8 and 7. So we do it in 2. So just for people who don't know his films, and if you know the years of the films between us, maybe.
Oh, I do.
Just to give the audience an idea. So go on, 10 and 9. Go for it.
Okay. So my number 10 favorite. Now, these are, again, not the greatest Marlon Brando movies. These are my favorite. Number 10 is a movie that's maligned called The Night of the Following Day, 1968, starring Marlon Brando, Richard Boone, and Rita Moreno. And the reason I bring this up is because Marlon Brando had a very tumultuous relationship with Rita Moreno. And this film, I don't think that they're playing on that, but they have to have been aware of it. The filmmaker, I forget the director's name now. It's not like an Elia Kazan or something, but they had to have been aware of that. And there's that chemistry in this movie, but it's a very unsettling chemistry because this is a movie about kidnapping an heiress in the south of France. And Richard Boone is sort of the hard-ass guy who doesn't think anything of her life one way or another, and she's sort of wooing Brando, his character, which is called Bud.
Interesting. His nickname, wasn't it, when he was a kid?
Right. And he's basically muscle in that. Brando wears a blonde wig, not unlike his dyed blonde hair in The Young Lions, but it's sort of a blonde mop top. And if I would compare it to anybody, he looks a bit like Adam Faith. It's not a great film, but there is something about it. It's the atmosphere. Most of it's at night in the south of France, and there's just a mood the film creates. So it's not necessarily a performance that's going to knock your socks off, but there is something between he and Rita Moreno in this movie. There's a subtext going on in this film. And when you know their backstory, you go, oh, yeah, there's something kind of torturous about this. So that's my number 10.
Okay.
My number 9 is a film that I know that you're a big fan of, and that's The Missouri Breaks, 1976. Oh, yeah. Arthur Penn directing. Jack Nicholson, who, by the way, probably deserves an episode of Film Gold on his own. You know, he's got many great performances. Some of my favorite movies of his, like Five Easy Pieces. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is one of your favorites. Carnal Knowledge is one of mine. Mm-hmm. And The Missouri Breaks is one of 2 movies on my list where Brando's humor comes through in his performance, because Brando is a very charming and funny guy in interviews, sometimes maybe unintentionally, but it rarely comes across on screen when he's trying to be funny, like in something like Bedtime Story with David Niven. He's doing this sort of Jerry Lewis routine. Now, we know that Brando's sense of humor and the things that he thought were hilarious were very, very lowbrow. You know, it was mooning people and, you know, maybe a lot of farting jokes and things like that.
Sorry to interrupt you. There is a biography, the 1,000-page Peter Manso one, which you could take with a cellar of salt. But one of his girlfriends there in his bedroom just having farting contests, so you can fart the loudest. But we're going to come on to that later, this sort of weird mix of deep and shallow, highbrow and lowbrow. You know, he's reading Shakespeare 1 minute and then mooning people the next. But anyway, carry on.
Exactly. So you say Carry On. The Carry On films would have been highbrow compared to Brando's humor. Yeah. But in The Missouri Breaks, he's wonderful as this bounty hunter. He's hysterical. You get to see Brando in drag. It's a very underrated film, just as a Western. It's just a very underrated Western. And Brando is hysterical in it. It's sort of coming across like Richard Harris, but I mean, he's really, really wonderful in it. But I know it's one of your favorites. Is it on your list in your top 10?
Yeah, it's not that high because, I mean, I'll come to it in a sec, but yeah, I think it's pretty messy. I was kind of trying to vote with my heart and my head in sort of equal measures. So, and I think it's loads of fun, yeah. And obviously him and Nicholson were really, really good friends. And when Brando died, Jack Nicholson gave a really nice eulogy or tribute.
Yeah, I think you're going to find most of the movies on my list fall under the category of messy.
Fair enough.
I think at least half of them. But I mean, for me, it just seems to get better. I don't know what it is, but something about that time period and that era of filmmaking, the good qualities of these movies sort of rise to the surface with the passage of time.
Okay, excellent. I haven't seen that one that was a number 10. There's a big chunk of 60s films that I've never seen. Somewhere between One-Eyed Jacks and Burn, I've kind of missed a load of those 60s.
Well, anyway. Get ready, because they're coming at you today.
Well, that's kind of good that we've got different lists, because then the listeners will know about more films. All right, my number 10. I feel bad because there's just so much competition here, but my number 10 is One-Eyed Jacks from 1961. Okay. We're going to talk about the making of that later rather than now. But again, I'd never seen it until last week. Famously, it's the only film that he ever directed. And I'm going to ask you later which of these stories we can believe. But anyway, involving another very eccentric character, Stanley. I thought it was a bit on the nose, as they say, that he was called Kid and Carl Malden was called Dad. Yeah. But it was interesting having reread his memoir in preparation for this, Songs My Mother Taught Me, to see that there is clearly that subtext. So, although Carl Malden wasn't really that much older, he's probably like 10 years older than him or something. But I watched a few films last week with him, and he's just so alpha. I think that's maybe the thing that we like about him. He's so effortlessly alpha. He doesn't seem to have to make any effort, really. I don't know how much effort he was making. We don't know, do we?
Well, you keyed in on what I was talking about earlier, about looking for these sort of masculine role models. And I think that's what I was drawn to. You know, it's sort of, how do I get that? Am I ever going to get that? Am I ever going to sort of own a room like that? You know, and Jim Morrison maybe is the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I can see that completely.
It's one of the most available Marlon Brando films because it's in the public domain. He never renewed the copyright, so it's always for sale for like $1 on DVD, One-Eyed Jack. So it might actually, ironically, be one of his most seen films. It's so available. I think that's a movie, well, you talk about a mess. That's a movie in need of some serious editing.
Well, I mean, of course, it had a lot of serious editing.
It did, yes.
The first cut was supposed to be, I mean, when they say rough cut, I've sort of learned over the years that a rough cut just almost means all the available footage in some kind of order. I mean, there's a 3-hour rough cut of Planes, Trains and Automobiles, for God's sake.
Right.
I don't think they were ever intending that to be 3 hours, but I mean, there was, I can't remember, it's like 1 million feet. I don't know what that equates to, but it's 6, 7, 8 hours, I don't know, that they shot. Yeah, I agree with you, but I definitely, would direct listeners. I mean, I'd direct listeners to all of these, to be fair, but yeah. My number 9, I'm sorry it's so low actually, is Julius Caesar, 1953. I've grown to love Shakespeare over the years. You know, when we were at school, we were kind of force-fed it. And like in Spain, I used to live in Spain, they sort of force-fed Cervantes, you know, or Don Quixote de la Mancha more specifically. But what I love about it is that he takes the alpha, what we talked about, and it kind of shows you that there's probably not that much difference between Mark Antony, going by what the historians say, and some of the brooding outcasts that Brando played. But I love his diction, you know, which ironically, of course, he became known for mumbling, but his argument was that people don't declaim in real life.
Right.
You know, we start saying a sentence. I mean, I know this from editing podcasts, and you know from editing radio shows. People start a sentence and then it goes off in another direction. You know, we don't speak perfectly. Right. But I love, you know, the way he delivers those speeches, just fantastic. And of course, he looks amazing, you know. You can argue what his prime was, but so yeah, I really liked Julius Caesar. Obviously, you got some great, you know, James Mason, John Gielgud.
Sure.
Got some great British talent there. And Julius Caesar is one of my favourite Shakespeare plays, so that's why I've got that.
I saw that in school when I was, I guess, about 13 or 14. I want to say it was middle school. And I remember being very impressed, not really knowing who Marlon Brando was at that point. But I remember the girls in the class thinking he was really good looking. So he was even having that effect in the early 80s. I know that he said that he had taken some records out. Would it have been Olivier, perhaps, reciting that speech to work on getting his accent?
The Mark Antony speeches or just Shakespeare? Right.
It might have been just Shakespeare in general. And I know that Gielgud was so impressed that he invited him to join the Royal Shakespeare Company.
Oh, wow. He did respect Gielgud, didn't he? Yeah.
He respected all of them, yeah.
All right, I'll give you my 8 and 7. My number 8 is one you've already mentioned, which is Missouri Breaks. I wanted to have it higher up the list, but yeah, it's pretty messy. And there's various sort of versions. It's an Arthur Penn film about whether he let him improvise or whether he was just a law unto himself.
Yes.
Probably both, but...
I think it's a bit of both, yeah.
Suddenly out of nowhere, he's an Irish sort of cross-dresser. He's playing a bounty hunter, isn't he?
Yeah.
And the bit with if you remember the bit with the horse and the carrot, he improvises that. He has a carrot in his mouth and lets the horse start biting the carrot out of his mouth.
Yeah.
But then it's quite genuinely shocking, right? Because the Jack Nicholson character slits his throat while he's asleep.
Yes.
And they suddenly cut and he says, oh, you know, do you know what woke you up? You know, I just cut your throat. Brando has a lot of death scenes. He dies a lot in his films. So he got quite good at that. And they're all genuinely pretty realistic for me.
He also has a lot of scenes where he's beaten up almost sacrificially, you know, and offered Christ-like at the end of the film.
Well, that's it. I think it was Young Lions he wanted to do a Christ-like, and they talked him out of it. Yeah. All right, my number 7 is On the Waterfront, 1954. Now, this is... Yeah, to me, this is the blonde on blonde of Marlon Brando films. And in case anyone doesn't know what that means, Blonde on Blonde is considered one of Bob Dylan's best albums. And I like it, but I've never quite seen the absolute magic in it in terms of Dylan albums of that period. And On the Waterfront, I think it's really good. I didn't necessarily buy him as a boxer. I don't know whether it would have helped if we'd actually seen him box or not. Because this is the funny thing. You know the boxing stance, right? So I can't demonstrate this. Is obviously audio. But if you're a right-handed boxer, you have your left slightly in front of you. You have your right protecting your chin, and you have your left foot forward. But have you ever seen the 50s boxing stance? You have your right next to your chin, and you have your left like jutting miles out.
Right.
Which is just a terrible boxing stance. And my granddad, actually, when I was a kid, showed me that. And I think even as a kid, I was thinking, well, why have you got your left jutted out? Can't someone just like whack you on the left side of your face? But anyway, I didn't totally buy Carl Morden in that film. And is it Lee J. Cobb?
Oh, Lee J. Cobb, sure.
I mean, he's amazing. Like it's kind of very similar to 12 Angry Men, actually, which he made. He just has that down, that kind of shouty, kind of angry guy. And then Brando gets beaten up. It's something about it that just didn't quite hit the mark. I think it's great. Like I say, it's like Blonde on Blonde. I can't hear it or see it as the masterpiece that everybody else says. Without giving it away, is that on your list or not?
It is on my list, so I'm going to refrain from my comments. And, but I will say that when we were discussing these figures, these charismatic figures like Brando and Orson Welles, I also believe Dylan was there on that list as well. You just brought up Dylan. So.
Yeah, I've kind of got that as one of the things we'll talk about, talking about why these people are so compelling, but we'll get to that. So go on, give us what are we up to?
Number 8 and number 7 for me. Then.
8 and 7 for you. Go for it.
Okay, so my number 8 film is a movie directed by Michael Winner from 1972 called The Nightcomers. It's a prequel to Henry James' Turn to the Screw.
All right.
You can argue the merits of doing a prequel to that story, but if you've read Turn to the Screw, you would know that Peter Quint is a very mysterious character who could have turned these children into what they became when the mistress comes to the house. And really, Brando, I feel, is the only actor who could pull this off, who could be menacing and charming and non-threatening as he does these horrible or exposes these children to these horrible, horrible things. And it's the closest he ever came to making a horror movie. I like the atmosphere of the way it's shot. Of course, it's always good to look at Stephanie Beacham. It's also, for 72, it's one of 2 films Brando was in that year that have sexually explicit material in them. But it's not the reason why it was on my list. It just so happens by sheerest coincidence that the other one is on my list somewhere too. So the number 7 movie, this is going to be the most controversial one. I think after this, I'm going to be in maybe more comfortable territory for people. But my number 7 movie is an all-star mess. For me, it is a glorious mess. It is one of my favorite movies of the 60s. Good. Brando is in it very fleetingly. So I hate to even add him on here. But again, he's funny in it. He plays a whacked-out guru in a flatbed truck.
I haven't seen this. I want to see Ringo's Mexican Gardener.
Right. It's Candy.
Candy.
1968, starring, now I'm going to butcher her name, I believe it's pronounced Eva Ali, a Swedish actress who recently resurfaced a few years in Italy, where she's been living as a teacher. So we got to see what she's been up to. And this is such a glorious mess of a film. You've got Ringo Starr as a Mexican gardener. Yeah. You've got John Astin in a dual role playing good and evil twin brothers. You've got, what's his name? Oh my goodness, I'm blanking on his name. James Coburn.
Oh, James Coburn, right.
As a sort of, oversexed doctor, Walter Matthau. And I do have an affection for these glorious all-star messes. Yeah. And there are a bunch of them at the time. And I mean, I guess the most famous one would be something like It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, but that's a very mainstream movie. This is not a very mainstream film. I mean, the novel that it was based on, Terry Southern's Candy, was at the time, it was controversial. How could this movie be even filmed, And that was the ad campaign, is Candy faithful only to the book? But rim shot there. And I'm thinking another movie that's like this is Casino Royale from 1967 with Woody Allen and Orson Welles and David Niven and Peter Sellers, that type of movie. And it's got a great soundtrack. You've got the Byrds doing great music on there and Steppenwolf. So there's plenty to recommend it. It's a cheat to have it on this list because he's only in it briefly, but he is very, very funny. I know behind the scenes there was some unpleasantness maybe going on between he and the lead actress. I think he maybe was trying to get something happening and it wasn't happening. Yeah. But that would be my very controversial number 7.
Was Richard Burton in that film as well?
Yes. Oh, Richard Burton, he steals the movie. He's Mephisto, the poet. Yeah.
Well, it wasn't Peter Sellers, was it? No, it wasn't.
No, Peter
What am I
Sellers
thinking of? You know what I'm thinking of? Magic Christian is a little bit like that, because that's a bit
similar.
It's a bit of a mess, and you got Graham Chapman and John Cleese from Monty Python, then you got Yul Brynner, amazing at the end.
And you've got a great rock soundtrack with Badfinger. So it's like its own genre. It's like you get a lot of Hollywood stars and British stars together and give them a lot of drugs and try to make some sort of a comedy/art film, and you wind up with something like Candy.
I haven't seen Casino Royale or Candy yet. The 67 Casino Royale, yeah. I'll get to all these films eventually.
Yeah.
All right, where are we at? So it's you again.
It's my 6 and 5?
Oh, it's you again, 6 and 5.
Okay. All right, well, number 6, I'm going to put The Wild One. I do agree with you in that I think it is an overrated film, but I think he's so great in it. And I think what he does in the film is so great. There's a scene where he's playing, it's like this cat and mouse with the girl working in the diner behind the counter, where he's sliding her the money and then he's pulling it back and sliding it. And it's sort of a thing that you wouldn't even notice until you really pay attention to what he's doing. Obviously, his character of Johnny, the scene, what are you rebelling against? What do you got? All of this stuff based on a true story. Apparently, this biker town biker group rolled into a small town and took it over. It's as good as any time to mention that I'm always a bit, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm almost offended on behalf of people who were young in the 50s, because it's constantly being drilled into our heads that the 50s was this very, very conservative, staid time, and nothing ever happened, and thank God the 60s came along. And that's complete BS. The 50s was nothing but turmoil. It was rock and roll and Beat Generation, and, the bomb is going to kill us any moment. And all of this stuff, yes, every generation, every time period has its alternative culture. But the alternative culture at that time was pretty mainstream. I mean, everybody knew about it. And the 60s is just kind of like a Technicolor version of the 50s. Anyway, that's my little soapbox about The Wild One.
Can I just comment really quickly, because it's not on my list. It was one of my honorable mentions. Yeah, of course, fans of my other podcast will, of course, know that the other biker gang were called the Beatles.
Yes.
And what's his name? Lee Marvin says.
Lee Marvin.
The Beatles missed you. Oh, the Beatles missed you. And I saw it when I was very young, and then I watched it. Oh, it's only a couple of months ago, I think. I did like aspects of it, and there was some great stuff. There's a scene where he comes into the place where she works, and he's doing this thing, like, just to backtrack on the waterfront for a sec. Maybe you're going to talk about it, the bit with the glove where he takes Eva Marie.
Yes, right, Eva Marie Saint's glove.
Brando was so good at, because he was so into the psychology of human behavior, as we'll get to later. There's a few bits like that. And obviously, he felt he had a strong power over women, and I think his problem was he didn't feel he had a power over anything else, really. Well, maybe not anything else, but because of his childhood. Again, we'll get to it eventually
on the next show.
In our next slide, our next slide.
Well, in that movie, you mentioned the Beatles aspect. I guess it's worth noting that this was banned in Britain for years.
Yeah,
and it's strange because I feel like this movie could have been better had it been made in a more, lenient era. I mean, they really went to town with biker movies in the late 60s, where they really could show, all the violence. And there's really not much of it going on in this movie. It's more like they come into town and they represent danger without actually doing much of it,
Yeah, because there were a couple of other things. I mean, I found just the dialogue a bit hokey, and some of the expressions he used that I'm nicking someone else's review, they were out of date before they left his mouth.
Yeah, they're all like jazz expressions, right? I mean, they're because that's pre rock and roll. That's 53. So there's a lot of daddy-o in that, right? Yeah,
we said something about you got a jive or something like that.
Yeah.
Saying. But the other thing about those films from that era, I always hate the fighting. It just looks so, not just this film, in most films of that era. I guess something like On the Waterfront perhaps pioneered a more realistic thing, but just the fighting's just really bad. And as I said, I'm not picking on this film in particular. But what rescued it for me, and what I found, this is the magic of the guy, right at the end, you remember she gets like a smile out of him. He
Yes.
suddenly smiles in the very, and I was just like, wow, this is just, it's almost like validated it's rescued the whole film.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
It's the most memorable moment of the whole. He becomes a sympathetic character you root for at the very end of the picture. Yeah, with that smile.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, he's totally relatable.
Yeah, and then just having read Brando's memoir, he sort of talks about Johnny, and he says, oh, I related to this guy. I did, almost certainly he would have had a father who put him down all the time and never gave him any respect. So I think because Brando felt something, that kind of validates it as well. So anyway, yeah, that was bubbling under, but yeah, I did quite enjoy it.
So here's my number. Am I going with number? Oh, no, I'm done, right?
I don't know.
No,
what number
I'm going with number 5. Number 5.
I've lost my thread completely, but yeah, number 5. Go for it.
Okay. So my number 5 then is a movie directed by Sidney Lumet based on a play by Tennessee Williams called Orpheus Descending. And this is the forgotten Tennessee Williams adaptation, The Fugitive Kind, starring Marlon Brando and Anna Magnani. And this is more well-known today because of Brando's character in his snakeskin jacket, because David Lynch used a lot of imagery from this film. He used it in Wild at Heart in 1990 with the Nicolas Cage character, who was also obsessed with Elvis, to tie that in. And so it has Brando coming before a judge, and he's wearing his snakeskin jacket. He's like, this was given to me by Leadbelly, And, he gets to work in this. Here we are in small town America again. Anna Magnani is this wife entrapped in a loveless marriage. And what does Brando represent? And it's actually her performance that really sells the movie. And I know that behind the scenes, this was a case where she, I believe, the actress, wanted to get something happening with Brando, and it wasn't happening, and they were not getting along. Yeah. But this is not a movie where you sit there and go, this is perfect. It's making complete sense. Everything is compelling about it. There are long stretches of this movie where literally nothing happens, and it's not even very interesting. So what happens for me anyway is you feel like you're entering into this fever dream where everything's beautifully shot and it looks great and you're trying to get along with it. And suddenly, it was my experience watching this movie. The first time I watched it, I fell asleep during the middle of it. And I was going in and out of consciousness as I was watching the film. And I was thinking, my God, how long is this thing is still on? I mean, you know how when you fall asleep and you think you've been asleep for hours and hours, and then it's really only been 20 minutes? Yeah. Right. So I had that experience. But there's something about it. There's something compelling about this story of this character, again, going into a small town, and he doesn't really do anything, but everybody just reacts around him. Yeah. That causes all these problems. Like they're the problem. He's not the troublemaker.
Yeah. Again, I haven't seen that one, but I mean, I know Anna Magnani from a film called, by Italians, Roma Città Aperta. I think it's Rome Open City, which is a Rossellini film, which is just fabulous realism. It's the realism genre, I suppose, set in during the Second World War. But yeah, apparently behind the scenes, it was kind of like Tallulah Bankhead again, wasn't it? The older woman just all over him, just trying to kiss his face up, and he's actually not interested for a change. They must have been seriously insulted.
Of course, his reputation. The one woman he didn't want.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I will get to that. That's 1960.
1960. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Is it back to me? Yeah. Right. Number 6 is Mutiny on the Bounty from 1962. Now, this is really, I think our lists are just proving that this is almost entirely subjective. I'm going to put in the show notes. I was actually on a podcast last year called The Stinking Pause, Pause. Really good podcast. And we reviewed Mutiny on the Bounty. And I think my passion for the film came through because, as you get older, you do start to sort of get more and more nostalgic about your childhood. And
sure.
I'll make this very brief, but when we first got a VHS recorder, it was like the best day of my life. I couldn't believe it, that you could record something off the TV and watch it again as many times as you wanted without having to wait for it to come on TV. The Mutiny on the Bounty is one of those films, and my sisters, I've got 2 sisters who are 4 and 5 years older. And at that time, we just used to always watch stuff together, plus my dad and sometimes my mum. And we just watched this to death. And I still love it now. And what I loved about it is that even at the age of 13 or 14, I knew Brando was taking the piss, as we'd say in England, with his accent.
Right.
And when he arrives on the ship, there's a really good podcast I recommend to you and everyone called History by Hollywood. And it takes films based on a real event, and it takes you scene by scene to tell you how accurate they were, but in an interesting way, not in a dry way. And they describe Christian, when he appears, as looking somewhere between a superhero and a leprechaun.
Right.
Which is brilliant because he's got a cape. He looks very colourful, and he's just completely hamming it up. And I just remember me and my sisters were just lapping it up. I think even then we didn't think it was a great film, but we just loved it. And a bit we always remembered was just before the mutiny. I don't know if you remember, but Bly, and again, this wasn't really very realistic. Trevor Howard was really playing this cartoon Bly.
Right.
He makes them all, they have to climb up the rigging to get fresh water. They're not allowed to just take fresh water. And there's a guy who starts drinking seawater and starts going mad, and his name's Williams. And my sisters know, we just always remember the line, "Williams has been drinking seawater, sir." I don't know why. And in our family, we were just like, I remember when I watched Marathon Man, my dad and I, every time we come across each other in the house, for ages afterwards, we go like, "Is it safe?" We just like picked up on these lines, and me and my sisters would just like, when we went to the beach, we'd say, "Oh, Williams has been drinking seawater." And I don't know.
Mr. Christian, kindly give me an explanation.
With the sea, with the water.
Williams has been drinking seawater, sir. I was giving him some fresh water. I'm afraid he'll die without it.
You'll give no one water without my permission. Take that ladle below.
Yes, sir.
Bloody bastard. You'll not put your foot on me again.
I think it's actually a really good film. And the thing about him, like, we'll talk about the 60s in general later on, but although we already have really, even in the films which aren't that great, there's always just those touches of magic. And
Exactly.
I found like the death scene, we know that he gets burned to death. I won't spoil it for people who haven't seen it, but well, I am going to, because I say he dies at the end. For his death scene, I was just really moved by that. Suddenly, like the upper class accent doesn't seem so ridiculous anymore because he's dying, and I don't know. He just has this ability to transmit something that you can't quite put your finger on, but it's something real. It's the crux of it, really. But go on, go for it.
Now, would you say that Brando as an actor, the auteur theory comes into play? Because we're talking about movies that some are, wonderful all the way through. Some are very problematic, but he sort of takes them over. So, would that fit into Brando, the actor, as auteur?
I don't know. How would you define auteur? Because that's, for a director, it'd be making their own vision out of the material. Is that what you're saying? Would you say?
Well, I mean, we know that Brando's involved in rewriting the script or rewriting his dialogue at the very least.
Yeah.
Once he got to a point where he had enough power and leverage that he could make certain demands, one could argue that he may have derailed films. Certainly the one we're talking about now, Mutiny on the Bounty, became this big scandal regarding him. It sort of finished him in Hollywood for a time. I don't know, but I mean, he's playing similar characters. Not like he's a chaplain or anything.
No, I know what you mean. I think it's just the pure charisma. Again, someone like John Lennon, or I don't know if it came from something in their childhood. It might be a bit of a cliche to say it comes from difficulties. They just had this thing that your regular person doesn't have. And I don't know if it's a willingness to be outrageous, or it's just, I mean, people around John Lennon have just said that his personal charisma, whether you liked him as a person or not, was just so strong. There was just this overpowering, and okay, some people get a bit over the top when they talk about celebrities, but, you hear it from enough people. I think it's just an overpowering charisma, and it might just come from being willing to like behave in a way that most people wouldn't, because all Brando's outrageous behavior, I'm sure other people would like to be as outrageous, but in polite society, most people just hold back. which is a point he just made endlessly in his memoir. And I think he was just a master of his craft. And I think he just stopped trying after a while because he was pissed off with Hollywood. He had a massive, obviously trauma, chip on his shoulder, whatever you want to call it. So I know what you mean. Yeah, he does tend to dominate.
Yeah, more early on. And obviously those movies are kind of set up for him to dominate.
Absolutely.
But it's something that was referenced. Brando said it several times in interviews. And I know we're kind of getting off the list here for a moment.
Yeah.
But he said that one of his great joys as an actor was observing people. And that's how he essentially learned his technique, right, was observation. And as soon as he became a film star, that was impossible because no one behaved normally around him. If anyone saw him, they would change their behavior completely. So I wonder about, did Brando get lazy later on? Or was it just like, there's no point to this anymore? Or the craft? Well, I mean, I could look at it from another way too. I mean, as a voice actor, you can be put into situations where you don't have to really exert yourself to give a performance that's acceptable, get your money and leave.
Absolutely, yeah.
There are only so many stories that can be told and so many situations and so many characters. So it happens for me with cartoon work. I'm given a script and I take one look at it and I know how to play the character because I've done it 100 times. So I don't really have to put much effort into it or even do much thinking. And I know it's going to work. Now, I guess, on something like a cartoon, it's not going to be very noticeable. But I suppose when you're blown up on a big screen and you have that reputation that Brando has, people are going to say, oh, he just threw it away, or he had contempt for his craft, which I've also heard people say.
Yeah, I think it's just when you reach that level of fame, and again, Beatles, Elvis, take your pick, you just realize after a while, very rarely are people going to be natural. Although you'd think, people who acted in a film with him, someone like, George C. Scott, let's say, in The Formula, they're less likely to be starstruck by him. So I suppose...
Right. Would that have influenced... I'm not saying that this is the reason why he became so infatuated with Tahiti, but would that have been more attractive to him because he was in a place where he was not thought of as a big film star?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So that's what happened with Mutiny on the Bounty, right? Wasn't that the criticism or the scandal was that he was purposely wasting time so he could spend as much time there and waste studio money, basically had a very expensive vacation?
Yeah, he kind of admitted it. And he said in Apocalypse Now, he kept Francis Ford Coppola just sitting for hours discussing the character, quote unquote. I mean, I think Mutiny on the Bounty was on, was it something crazy like 100,000 a day for every day they went over schedule? Or 50,000. Even if it's 20,000, that's $1962.
Yeah,
that is crazy.
It is.
All right, let's crack on. I'm on number 5 now. Now, number 5. This is it's not really controversial, but this is not one of his better-known films. This is Burn or Quemada from 1969. I love this film, and I saw it again last week. I had seen it before, but second time watch. I loved it. Now he's using more or less the same accent from Mutiny on the Bounty, not quite as exaggerated, of course.
Right.
To be honest, I was influenced by the fact that he thought, reading in his memoir years ago, I remember he said that he thought Byrne was some of his best acting. To be honest, that did influence me a bit. And it shouldn't, but it did. I love the whole themes of the colonial and, it's all the kind of stuff that, I'm going to say America just because he's from America, that America doesn't want to hear. But, that applies to Britain as well. We had an empire, for God's sake, that went round the world spreading good cheer. slight irony there. And you've got the hero, Dolores, isn't it? The rebel hero. But
right.
The whole idea of it is that, in a funny way, it's almost like Viva Zapata, but he's on the other side now. He's now the powerful guy coming in. It's the idea that it doesn't really matter who's your ruler because the power will go to their head. And of course, in Byrne, it's all to do with the sugar company. They're extracting materials. So in the end, it's a matter of economics. So that's kind of a theme that I've been heavy on for years and years and years because I still think people don't really understand it, even though it's pretty obvious. it's just economics over human lives. But I don't think anyone wants to really think that could happen, even though there's a massive history of it. But anyway, quick question for you. Have you seen Battle of Algiers, which is it Pontecorvo, isn't it, the director? Have you seen that film?
No, I haven't. I thought you were going to ask me if I saw Walker, which is it's essentially the same story because this is based on William Walker, right?
Yeah, William Walker, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. No, I say that because I've seen some clips of Battle of Algiers, but it's the same director. And it's got this sort of documentary style, which I'm just an absolute sucker for. I mean, even stuff like French Connection, you know, a lot of it it looks like a documentary about cops staking out a building, you know?
Right.
Because I love documentaries, so I love it when they mix the two. But yeah, absolutely love Byrne. Yeah, really like it.
All right.
I can't remember whose turn it is. Why don't you go? Who goes?
I don't know.
Okay, you go number 4.
One is one of your honorable mentions, and it's just a movie I just have great affection for, which is The Young Lions, 1958.
Yeah.
So it's based on the novel by Irving Shaw, which was a big bestseller, and of course you have Brando as a Nazi, which was controversial at the time. Probably even more so now that you would have a Nazi who would become a sympathetic character. And yes, as we alluded to earlier, Brando did want to die Christ-like with his arms outstretched. Of the main characters in the movie, he's the only one who does die. So you could say that they make that point of getting rid of him. But you've also have Montgomery Clift, who you mentioned when we talked about this off the show. You know, he had that terrible car accident. So
my God.
Yeah.
Just suddenly look 40 or even 50, isn't he?
Yeah. And Dean Martin, no stranger to dramatic roles. We don't really think of him that way. I mean, Rio Bravo's a dramatic role. And, you know, Dean's great in it. It's another movie that I feel is maybe a little too long for its own good. But I do like it. It's one of my... And again, you have Brando busting out an accent. That accent fluctuates between German and then occasionally a foppish British accent, you know, upper class sometimes. It's not consistent in that movie.
Yeah. Just comment briefly on that. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, I saw it, as I said, and all the stuff with him and the Swedish actress who's playing the captain's wife.
Yes.
Sizzling isn't even the word. And again, it's just so effortless because his character is, I don't know, I'm sure he's interested in women, but he's not really pursuing her. It's all the other way around. Right. And again, he just has women falling from everywhere. The French woman who disagrees with his politics and then kind of goes back on it. Yeah, I really like that. I'm thinking that could even have replaced One-Eyed Jackson number 10. But the only reason it wasn't higher as well is just because there's so much competition. But
right.
Anyway.
So, and then my number 3 is a movie you actually covered really well in giving your reasons for not having it high in your list or on your list at all, and that's On the Water, which you say it's like the blonde on blonde. I guess for me, it's the Highway 61 revisited. Right. I really get this movie. Yeah, you covered it so well. There's not much more I could say about it. But originally, the Carl Malden character, the priest, was supposed to be the main character in the film. And it was changed to incorporate Terry Malloy. And it was the beginning of the Brando-Sinatra feud because Frank Sinatra really wanted to play that part. I mean, I cannot imagine Frank Sinatra playing a former boxer, not with that frame. You know, I don't know who Sinatra would have been able to beat up. It would have been pretty ridiculous.
So skinny, wasn't he?
Yeah, he's so ridiculously skinny. And Sinatra thought that this was going to be his follow-up to From Here to Eternity. You know, this is going to be his big movie. And so he didn't get it. He didn't get the Sky Masterson part in Guys and Dolls, another Brando movie that's not on my list. I wouldn't even say that's Bubbling Under, even though that was a big success at the time. But I do like everything about this movie. I know that Elia Kazan is a problematic figure in discussing some of these films because he named names for the House of Un-American Activities Commission. So people have kind of a moral quandary about him. But, you know, the work speaks for itself. I mean, I think it's I think Brando's makeup is a little heavy-handed. That cut above the eye. Yeah. It's a bit much, but, you know, I like the bit with him, you know, the sensitive boxer, you know, keeping the pigeons on the roof. I'm a sucker for that kind of stuff. So there are some saccharine elements to it, but I do like it. And we haven't mentioned him at all. I'm blanking on his name. He plays his brother.
Oh, Rod Steiger.
Rod Steiger. He's fantastic in the movie. Yeah. So there you go. That's my number 3.
Yeah, it's the bit in the taxi. I think Brando had the idea when Steiger pulls a gun on him to actually have a look on his face that felt sorry for his brother.
Yeah. And Brando put in, it's the best moment, really. It was like when Charlie pulls the gun and Brando goes, wow.
Yeah.
And it's perfect because you'd never seen anything in a film like that before. We should mention that if we haven't already, is that there had been actors who, were of the method school, maybe even before the method was a thing, like John Garfield or somebody like that. But a lot of these things that were happening, especially in these 50s movies, were revolutionary for their time. I mean, there's a reason for Brando to be such an inspiration to all the actors that followed him. And I think with the passage of time, we sort of forget or take him for granted because we're just so accustomed to seeing people behave like that on screen. Like you mentioned, he was criticized for mumbling, but we see that now in films all the time. But it was so fresh and so new, and he's really the guy, as any actor will tell you.
Just one other thing, actually, another thing that marked it down. Probably my favorite film ever, pound for pound, pun intended, is Raging Bull. And to be honest, I found Jake and Joey, Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci, I found that a more compelling two brothers relationship than this one. That's just my personal feeling. I'm not saying I'm right at all, but I felt like maybe Raging Bull kind of updated this film a tiny bit, although it didn't have, well, it did have the mob in it, of course, didn't it?
Yeah,
Raging Bull.
Yeah,
I mean, the only reason it finally got a shot at the title was because he was willing to throw a fight.
Right.
So I just think perhaps Raging Bull had the advantage of 25 more years of film history, which, as you quite rightly say, a lot of it is due to Brando. I haven't heard Robert De Niro talk about Brando much, but I'm sure there's no way he would deny that he owes quite a debt to him. So where are we up to?
All right. I guess, I don't know. Wherever you are, go for it. I've got two more, so...
Oh, you've done 4 and 3. Okay. My 4 and 3. Did you have Apocalypse Now? Was that Bubbling Under?
No. Bubbling Under, but yeah, I didn't put it on my list.
Right. As I said, this is the only kind of quote-unquote bit part or supporting role that I think is in my top 10.
Yeah.
But it's just so strong. I mean, Apocalypse Now, again, is up there with Raging Bull, maybe even joint top film. Part of it was the circumstances. If I can just very briefly tell a story. When The Redux came out in 2003, I was living in London. And at that time, I used to live at the cinema. I mean, I barely ever go to the cinema anymore. And when The Redux came out, I heard I was in that extra 45 minutes. It was Saturday afternoon. I went to a cinema in Leicester Square, one of the old-fashioned cinemas that had multi-tiers. So if you sat at the back, you were like much higher than everyone else. Sorry. But
stadium seating, we call it here.
Stadium seating, yeah. Yep. Almost in the bleachers. But of course, in the cinema, it's not a bad thing because it's almost the best view. Anyway, so this Redux came on, and the cinema was absolutely packed because for some reason I thought, that not that many people would be interested, perhaps because of the length of it. And I swear, nobody. Maybe I'm imagining it, but it seemed like nobody made a single sound for the whole film, And the only time I ever kind of broke away from the film was I had a sneak to look at my watch when Brando appeared because I was curious to see how far into it. And I think in the Redux, it's like 3.5 hours. I think he appears just before the 3-hour mark, which is incredible. I won't bore the listeners with all the stories. We all know the stories. Dennis Hopper said, whatever you've heard about how mad Apocalypse Now was, it was 100 times madder than that. And there's an amazing documentary called Hearts of Darkness.
Yes.
Absolutely fantastic. All about what Coppola went through and Martin Sheen's heart attack. Anyway, to cut a long story short, so Brando appears. He hadn't read Heart of Darkness. He was overweight. And they just made it work. And they he shaved his head and they lit him. There's a speech, actually, that I put at the end of one of my John Lennon episodes. Don't laugh. Because I was tying it to Brando and, in fact, tying it to myself as well. It was a weird episode. And Mark Chapman as well. Anyway, that was a weird episode. And it was that speech where he's talking about when the forces go in and the inoculated children, they cut off their arms.
Right.
The Viet Cong. But it's just the way he delivers that speech and says, without judgment, he says it's judgment that defeats us. And then even that's the bit where he says, the horror.
Yes.
Just that. I mean, I don't know why. It's hard to say. I mean, I'm sure another actor could have done that. Coming from him, I don't know if it just feels more real. I don't know. It's entirely subjective, but yeah, it's my number 4.
Yeah, no, I mean, I love the film, but it's like The Godfather. Like, honestly, I'd be a fool not to have The Godfather in my top 10. But it's sort of like saying to somebody, what's your favorite Beatles song? Oh, it's Hey Jude. And it's just...
Yeah, it's too obvious.
Right. So I wanted to choose some other ones. But yes, and I think before there was the Redux, the Heart of Darkness documentary came out, or Hearts of Darkness documentary came out first, correct?
Yes.
And then there was the Redux, because I didn't see it in the theater, but I saw it on television where it was hacked to bits, much like the animal in the film. And then eventually I did see Hearts of Darkness, and I actually got into the film via that documentary. Because up until that documentary, if I'm not mistaken, Apocalypse Now did not have a great reputation. People were not speaking about that movie. It was thought of as this failure, like Heaven's Gate is, or was thought of as that failure. And I just remember people were talking, the unfulfilled promise of Apocalypse Now. It could have been something. At the time, Platoon had come along and had stolen its thunder and won all of these awards. I don't think Platoon has aged nearly as well or is nearly the same caliber of film as Apocalypse Now. But that, I think, started that reevaluation. There was a whole slew of Vietnam-era movies coming out.
Yeah.
And I think Hearts of Darkness, that documentary sort of kicked everything off.
I think the other thing for me is that I've studied the Vietnam War quite a bit since I saw the film. And what this film has over all the other ones, I think Full Metal Jacket's great, Platoon's great, what the other ones, Deer Hunter, I mean, the Russian Roulette's a bit dubious.
There's Hamburger Hill. There's a whole bunch of them.
Good Morning Vietnam. Oh, God.
Right. Yeah, Born on the 4th of July.
Well, yeah.
Casualties of War with Michael J. Fox. All right.
There's so many. Yeah. Coming Home as well. Yeah.
Right. Yes. Big one.
No, and I think what Apocalypse Now has, again, it was due to circumstances. We know it all went to shit. Terrible making of, and one person literally had a heart attack, and I think Coppola was on his way. But what it has over the other is that it's a hallucinogenic look at how utterly mad it is and how incoherent it is. And Platoon's great, but it's quite a coherent film. You don't really get the madness. You get a lot of
violence. You've got good guys and bad guys in Platoon.
Exactly. Yeah, and
it's very traditional.
And these great lines, I mean, I think John Milius is a great writer. He actually had something to do with Jaws as well. He partially wrote the Indianapolis speech that Quint gives in that film. And the stuff where, are you an assassin? He says, no, I'm a soldier. He says, you're neither. You're a grocery clerk sent to collect a bill. And just the way he delivers that, brilliant. And he's talking, I think they cut it out the film, that thing about the bloodlust. And that was one of the things in his memoir as well, about this primordial instinct to kill, etc.
I would just say before we move on, just as a piece of trivia, the very first movie that Orson Welles intended to make when he came to Hollywood was an adaptation of Heart of Darkness.
There's a good radio version of that with Orson in it. Yeah.
Yep.
Somehow, I don't know whether that would have worked back in the early 40s. I'm sure he would have made it work.
His way of doing it was that it was going to be, you weren't going to see the main protagonist. So it was going to be the camera's point of view throughout the whole picture.
Wow, interesting.
So,
I mean, one thing, well, it's going to be part 2, isn't it? But I've always felt this Brando and Wells, they had a few things in common, and it's funny that there's that connection there as well.
Yeah.
Also, we just reviewed The Third Man on another podcast run by the same guy called Real Britannia. And we were talking about how Orson turns up in The Third Man and arguably steals it. And then 30 years later, Brando turns up and steals it.
Exactly.
All right. So my number 3 is the film he made, I think it was the same year as The Godfather, Last Tango in Paris. And how can I sum this up? The very opening scene I love, where the L train screams past and he's blocking his ears. There's a speech he makes where he's basically telling his life story. And I think that's the thing that Brando has over almost every other actor. And again, a little bit of a parallel with John Lennon. Most people didn't personalize lyric-wise in the same way John Lennon did. Perhaps they did in a more abstract way. But it's this willingness. I can't think of another actor who would make a speech talking about his parents as drunks and just basically, I mean, apparently changed the story a little bit that he tells them in the film. But yeah, it's this idea of can you have an anonymous relationship, or in the end, will you always want to get to know the other person and get to know the other person's name?
My father was a drunk, tough, whore fucker, bar fighter, super masculine. My mother was very poetic and also a drunk. And all my memories when I was a kid was of her being arrested nude. We lived in a small town, farming community. We lived on a farm. And I come home after school. She'd be gone or in jail or something. And I used to have to milk a cow every morning and every night. And I liked that. But I remember one time I was all dressed up to go out and take this girl to a basketball game. And I started to go out, and my father said, "You have to milk the cow." And I asked him, I said, "Would you please milk it for me?" And he said, "No, get your ass out there." So I went out and I was in a hurry. I didn't have time to change my shoes, and I had cow shit all over my shoes. And on the way to the basketball game, it smelled in the car. And I don't know, I can't remember very many good things.
So yeah, that's that one. I've always loved that film. It's unfortunate to me, the public always seem to latched on to the butter scene, and it just kind of titillates people. I couldn't tell exactly what this film's about, but then there's the other scene with the dead wife and everything. I think one of the reasons he quit the theatre, and he says this in his memoir, is that when he was doing Streetcar, particularly, you have to give 8 performances a week, and he just was giving so much of himself. So the ironic thing about him having this reputation but not liking acting is that he was too into it at the beginning. I think he burned himself out, frankly, theatre-wise. So anyway, that's my number 3. So where are we up to?
Oh, how about I do number 2 and number 1, and you can do your number 2 and number 1, because my number 2 is your number 3. So my number 2 is Last Tango in Paris. Okay. It was going to be my number 1. I can tell this story. I'd spilled the beans to Nancy. I said, that's going to be my number 1. And then I watched it again, and then I watched... Now, I honestly didn't go back and sit and watch the entire film again because I just didn't have time to do that. But there were certain key scenes I wanted to see from 2 pictures. And I decided that Last Tango really should be number 2 on my list. But I agree with everything you said. And yes, the explicit scenes, and especially the butter scene, and the fact that amazingly, after all these years, people are still under the impression that they're watching a porn, like they actually are having sex. And that's constantly being brought up. And it's like, no, they're not. It's make-believe, folks. But that scene where he's basically recounting his own life story, but changing certain elements. And that scene with his wife, where he goes from the most enraged, angry, bitter. I mean, he is calling her every name in the book, this lifeless corpse sitting on this bed, dressed up beautifully, in the traditional way. And then that turn, it is so beautiful, that turn where he's exercised all of his bitterness and anger at that betrayal. And now he's so remorseful. And, in anyone else's hands, that would be laughable. You would sit there and not believe that for a second. But it's so moving.
I'll never discover the truth about you. Never. I mean, who the hell were you? Remember that day? The first day I was there, I knew that I couldn't get into your pants unless I said them. What did I say? Oh, yes. May I have my bill, please? I have to leave. Last night I ripped off the lights on your mother. I and the whole joint went bananas. All your guests, as you used to call them. Well, I guess that includes me, doesn't it? Huh? It does include me, doesn't it? For 5 years, I was more a guest in this fucking flophouse than a husband. With privileges, of course. And then to help me understand you, you let me inherit Marcel, the husband's double whose room was the double of ours. And you know what? I didn't even have the guts to ask him. Didn't even have the guts to ask him if the same numbers that you and I did were the same numbers you did with him. Our marriage was nothing more than a foxhole for you. And all it took for you to get out was a 35-cent razor and a tub full of water. You cheap, goddamn, fucking godforsaken whore. I hope you rot in hell. You're worse than the dirtiest street pig that anybody could ever find anywhere. And you know why? Because you lied. You lied to me, and I trusted you. You lied. You knew you were lying. Go on, tell me you didn't lie. Haven't you got anything to say about that? You can think up something, can't you? Huh? Go on, tell me something. Go on, smile, you cunt. Tell me something sweet. Smile at me and say I just misunderstood. Go on, tell me. You goddamn fucking pig fucking liar. Rosa. I'm sorry. I can't stand it. To see these goddamn things on your face. You never wear makeup. You fucking shit. I'm gonna take this off your mouth. You always hated lipstick. Rosa. Oh, God. I'm sorry. I don't know why you did it. I do it to him. I do. Oh. I just don't know. God.
You know, for me, those two scenes are really the two key scenes of the entire film. And yes, that opening scene with the train and then the close-up of Brando's face. I remember seeing this movie, actually, the first time I almost saw it, it was playing on something called Wometco Home Theater in the New York City area. It was WHT, and it was after dark. For a fee, you could see movies that were considered adult or X-rated or R-rated. And it was on television, but if you didn't pay the fee, the screen would be wavy. You would have wavy lines, and it was a real struggle. And there's probably an entire generation of people around my age, all living in the same area, who remember trying to see smut through hazy lines and wavy TV screens. That was the first time I kind of sort of saw it. You know, the reputation, even as a kid, I knew what the reputation of that movie was. And then when I rented it, it just hit me where I live, you know. And it was at that time when I was out carousing. You know, I mean, I wasn't looking for some kind of anonymous relationship out of some sort of existential grief, but I was just really, really drawn to that character of Paul. And then at the end, what's tragic for me, I mean, he is a tragic character. At the end, it's like he chucks everything he says away, and he's just so needy at the end where he's chasing Maria. And for some people, that would almost spoil the movie. But for me, it just makes the movie. It's like, oh, that's my moment as Terry to go, wow. It's like, I can't believe after all that, you're going to just piss it away and just betray everything. But it's wonderful.
Yeah, just a very quick comment. Yeah, the scene with the wife, again, this might sound a bit of a cliche, but it was probably channeling his mother, I imagine. You know, because as we'll get to, I mean, his mother was a drunk, and I think in deep down, probably felt this mother did want to connect with him, but she just wasn't able to. She just wasn't there, you know. There's a quote, like it said to Bertolucci, I'm never going to give myself, what's the word? Not give myself away, but give myself to the role, you know. I'm never going to tear myself apart again like that. So I think he'd done that in Broadway and got sick of it, and I think he did that in film. And perhaps that could be one of the reasons why you could argue he was phoning it in almost most of the
After
time,
that.
or goofing around or phoning it in. Yeah. So
yeah, and you know, I know that he did deny later that, you know, that's a completely fictional piece, and I made a lot of that stuff up. But then various biographers have researched it and like, no, a lot of this stuff is true and it's based on interviews he's given to people who've known him. So he did try to obscure it later. He almost both he and Maria Scheider tried to reject that movie. They had very difficult relationship with that film. I guess we can just leave it at that.
Yeah, everyone can read. Right, I think I know what your number one, but knowing you, it might be the Appaloosa. So I'm hoping it isn't.
No, it's The Chase with Jane Fonda.
Oh, The Formula. Go on, give us your number one, because it's going to be in my list.
It's A Streetcar Named Desire.
Of course it is, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I watched, there were key moments again. So when I was really debating this and I was thinking about it, and, you know, part of me would have wanted to put the Appaloosa out there, but it's just a real shock.
The Island of Dr. Moreau. Yeah.
Right, you can't deny Streetcar Named Desire. I mean, it's funny to think that this was such a success on Broadway. And like you said, he was doing this over and over and over again. And I would love to see, there's no way to see, but I would love to see Jessica Tandy, how she handled that role compared to Vivien Leigh. And I'm sure she was great. I know there is a radio version of it. He did it for, I want to say it's like Screen Directors Playhouse or something. They were still doing these adaptations on the radio, and he's very restrained in the radio version of it. I'm not sure why. Maybe he just saves it up for the screen, but he's just electrifying. He's so charismatic. You know, we talked about Elvis in the 68 Comeback Special being like the best looking person. And that's exactly what this is. I'm seeing this as a straight man and going, I would give anything to look like that. Not to behave that way. I mean, there's a whole other world you could get into of how his behavior in that movie is so appalling. And yet scores of women, generation after generation, are just like totally besotted with how he looks. It's, you know, it's almost like everybody gets to be Stella because of how he comes across in that film. But it's electrifying. I mean, everything he does, where he's breaking the plates, the little scene where he's like, my part of the table's clean now after he's destroyed all the plates. It's all great. It's all great stuff.
Yeah, with Jessica Tandy, unfortunately, I've only ever seen her in Driving Miss Daisy. I've got to like try and get that image out of my head and try and imagine her 40 years earlier. But no, it's interesting. With Vivien Leigh, for example, I can't stand Gone with the Wind. I tried to watch it. You know, when you get these classic films, like I think Casablanca's, I think it's good, but I don't have any connection with it. Star Wars, these kind of things, Lord of the Rings. And Gone with the Wind, I just think is, I don't know, I'm sure it's got some charm to it. And if I watch it again, maybe I'll like it. But I just thought, I'll tell you why I'm coming to this. Streetcar is my number 2, by the way.
Okay.
But in this one, I think Brando said in his memoir that she was actually quite like Blanche in that she slept with a lot of people. And she also, Vivien Leigh in real life, started to go mad, to lose her mind. And Laurence Olivier wasn't with her anymore, but was still caring for her, which I thought was quite sweet. But I mean, the chemistry between those two, I mean, it's so ironic that according to him, she slept with a lot of people, he slept with a lot of people, but they didn't sleep with each other off the set. And he said it's because of Laurence Olivier, because he actually liked Laurence Olivier. So, a rare show of morality in Hollywood there. But it's just this smouldering, and Vivien Leigh is remarkable. And in a way, the reason is because, like Brando, I think she was living it for real, like I said. She was going mad. I don't know about her promiscuity. I don't know anything about that. I'm just going by what he said. And it's sensational. Do you know the only thing that I don't quite buy, or I think is over the top, is ironically is the Stella. I love it. I mean, I love it. It's the only bit where I kind of feel like he's just turning it up a bit too much.
Hey, Stella! Hey, Stella!
It's weird. I still love it.
I could see that. You know who breaks my heart in that movie is Carl Malden.
Yeah.
Breaks my heart in that. He's so underrated. he popped up a couple times in this conversation, but yeah, he's really an underrated actor.
But yeah, what can I say? Streetcar's my number 2. And probably guess it's not the Appaloosa, it's The Godfather. I mean, you must have seen his screen test, footage of the screen test. And, you see him put... did he actually put cotton wool in his cheeks, or is that a myth?
I don't know if that's something in there, yeah.
But in his memoir, he talked about, he sympathized with Don Corleone. He thought it was much better, rather than play him as a sort of loud gangster, play him as a kind of calm guy who can occasionally explode with anger. And of course, in the film, he's getting on as well.
Right.
He's in his 70s by the time he dies, the character. But I just felt like he just completely inhabited this guy. And there's another great story where Coppola went to his house and Brando decided he wasn't going to speak at all. Or he started mumbling, and then someone called his house and he just picked up the phone. He was mumbling. And apparently the rationale was that he played Don Corleone as if he'd been shot in the throat. So that's why you get this voice. And it's a shame, really, that it's so parodied and imitated, because it kind of makes it seem quite cartoony. But so many people have talked about The Godfather. I don't have too much more to say, but I just feel like it really inhabited that character, and it's just so iconic. And
he inhabits that character so well that it's a shock to think that Last Tango in Paris came out the same year.
Exactly, yeah. It's amazing.
You go, how is this possible? How can someone look so... And there's not, a great deal of makeup going on. They didn't do a Marathon Man on him. Yeah. But, it is pretty remarkable. I have a weird relationship with that movie. I do love The Godfather, but it was a movie that until very recently, I never saw from beginning to end because it was always on television. And every time I would turn on the television and flip through the dial, I would see a little bit of it. So over a long period of years, I finally saw the entire movie out of sequence. It was just always on television. And then the other thing about it is, I believe this is true, or it's the last released performance from Marlon Brando is in the video game of The Godfather. If you can imagine that they made a video game. I actually own it, not because I was dying to play a Godfather video game, but just the idea of Marlon Brando being in it. And evidently he recorded his lines from a hospital bed.
Wow.
So it was one of the last things he did.
Wow.
And he also worked on some cartoon where he played a little girl. And it's never been released. You can look up on YouTube and hear Brando reading lines as this character.
Oh, was that like a cleaning lady?
Yes.
No, that's an old woman. Yeah. I think it's an old woman.
Oh, it's an old woman? Oh,
and he dressed up as an old woman to do the lines.
Right, yeah. But, The Godfather, I think some of it they had a voice double do because some of it was just unusable. But evidently that's the last piece of acting he did. So that's a rare character for him to return to. I mean, obviously he does it in The Freshman. He's not really playing that character, but, a variation of it. You mentioned The Freshman before. Is that the first meta movie where you're drawing on someone's affection and memories for another film and trying to turn it into something else? I mean, I guess it's not, but it seems like a very modern idea. I'm not saying like The Freshman's a great film. I mean, it's okay,
Do you mean like the same person spoofing an earlier character?
Yes, right. Like he's actually spoofing himself.
I don't know, actually.
It was surprising that it would be him, of all people.
Yeah, it's weird. No, I think he enjoyed it. I think it's almost a bit like George Harrison being in the Ruttles.
Right.
I think his way of dealing is to make fun of it,
But you never see like Nicholson doing a spoof of The Shining. Yeah. You just couldn't imagine, but...
I think The Shining almost seems like a parody anyway to me. Honestly, his performance. It's like Cuckoo's Nest. They could have done like SNL or something and had him turn up as McMurphy. Yeah, could have done that. Just one final thing. I much prefer The Godfather to The Godfather Part 2. And I prefer Pacino in the first one as well. The switch to being the Don and taking over. Because he plays in calm as well. That's what I love. You really get the feeling that he could be his son. Because he takes exactly the same approach that Brando did with Corleone. But also, when I saw They did like a series on TV in England. Maybe they did it in America as well, where they did it all chronologically. The third one hadn't been made. It was only the first two. So all the events were done chronologically.
Right.
And I just so loved Robert De Niro. I mean, I could give two shits about the Oscars nowadays. But in those days, I think, had a bit more validity. But I think he so deserved that Oscar because it made the Brando Corleone make more sense.
Right.
Because I could totally believe that this is a young man and then this guy is an old man. It just seemed to follow. It was that calmness. It's standing up to authority as a young guy. And then these sudden bouts of violence, where he knifes the old guy who killed his father,
right.
Si chiama Antonio Andalini, e questo è Bessie. And he gives him that knife. It's amazing. Yeah, so I think De Niro as a young Vito elevated Brando's performance in a funny way. But
so do you think? I mean, I know we're going to get into something else. Would De Niro be Brando's natural successor? I suppose. I mean, it's kind of a silly thing to put on someone, but
not in a direct way. But I think in terms of some of the stories about him, I've never read any biographies of him, and I'm not sure whether I find him actually an interesting guy off screen.
That's the thing. Yeah, I don't
maybe
think
he is, maybe he isn't. Yeah, but just knowing, because I have this weird connection to Raging Bull, because I've always been fascinated by boxing for a start. It's one of the things. And what he went through on Raging Bull, he didn't put that weight on just to win an Oscar. Absolutely no way. Joe Pesci, everyone will tell you that.
Right.
The dedication. And the amazing thing is that he boxed 1,000 rounds with the real Jake LaMotta. And Jake LaMotta said, I swear he could have turned professional as a middleweight boxer.
Wow.
So I think De Niro is the nearest to come to the Brando magic. And I said, I don't know about him in real life. So yes, in that sense. I mean, all the young guys, I mean, interesting having seen The Score for the first time ever last night.
Right.
Actually seeing Brando, De Niro and Ed Norton, because I love Ed Norton as well.
I thought he was wonderful. I thought he almost steals the movie for me. I think he's great in that. Yeah.
Well, I think he's great in general. I mean, it's funny. He was reprising the thing from Primal Fear where he pretends to be mentally challenged.
Right, yes.
Amazing, yeah. But seeing those three in the same room playing a scene was kind of magical for me. I think Ed Norton is one of the best of that generation.
That is the last Brando film. I mean, it's a good one to go out on,
Yeah, he was good enough. He's only in it a bit. It's a supporting role, obviously, but yeah.
I mean, it could be Free Money. I don't even know if you ever saw that.
No, I never saw
That's a comedy that he did where he plays a mad Swedish guy.
Right. Craziness. All right, what we're going to do is we've got to the end of our top 10, and I think we've done nearly 2 hours. So we are going to, we're not going to do a big sign-off to the listeners, but we're just going to say that's the end of part 1, and we'll be back soon for part 2. Stay tuned.
It's impossible through words to describe what is necessary to those who do not know what horror means. Horror has a face. And you must make a friend of horror. Horror and moral terror are your friends. If they are not, then they are enemies to be feared. They are truly enemies. I remember when I was with Special Forces, it seems 1,000 centuries ago. We went into a camp to inoculate some children. We left the camp after we had inoculated the children for polio. And this old man came running after us, and he was crying. He couldn't say. We went back there, and they had come and hacked off every inoculated arm. There they were in a pile of little arms. And I remember I cried, I wept like some grandmother. I wanted to tear my teeth out. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I want to remember it. I never want to forget it. I never want to forget. And then I realized, like I was shot with a diamond bullet right through my forehead. And I thought, my God, the genius of that. The genius, the will to do that. Perfect, genuine, complete, crystalline, pure. And then I realized they were stronger than me because they could stand it. These were not monsters. These were men, trained cadres. These men who fought with their hearts, who have families, who have children, who are filled with love. But they have the strength to do that. If I had 10 divisions of those men, then our troubles here would be over very quickly. You have to have men who are moral and at the same time who are able to utilize their primordial instincts to kill without feeling, without passion, without judgment. Because it's judgment that defeats us.